Hello, I am Betsy Hill, President of BrainWare Learning Company, and I want to welcome you to our webinar on soft skills. This is a re-recording of the webinar we held on April 25th, which had audio difficulties. At the bottom of the slide and in the chat window is a link to a survey on soft skills. I would encourage you to pause the recording and take just a moment to fill out the survey. It's just a few items and it won't take you very long. If you would like a certificate of participation for this webinar, please email me at bhill@mybrainware.com. That's bhill@mybrainware.com. The last slide of the presentation also has my contact information, so you can get it again there. Also, if you would like copies of the handouts from the presentation, you can also email me and request those, and we'd be very happy to provide them. As we work with educators and employers and workforce development groups around the country, among the biggest challenges they always express is the term soft skills. They bemoan the lack of soft skills among their students and their trainees or their employees. And as new types of jobs and careers emerge, we are all coming face to face with the fact that we can't train our students or employees for jobs that we can't even yet identify. So it becomes even more important that we help them with skills like the ability to learn, being flexible, and communicating. This webinar has evolved from our deepening understanding of neuroscience and what it can tell us about how people learn different skills and how we can foster the acquisition and improvement of various skills. I have become convinced that the conventional understanding of soft skills is just not very helpful. So what I want to do is to try to build a different model and start a different narrative today. Here's the plan for today's session. We're going to start off by exploring what underpins the distinction between hard and soft skills. We will look at the learning process and focus on a different neuroscience-based model of skills and knowledge acquisition. And then based on that, we'll look at a couple of examples of the types of exercises that can be used to help develop what we think of as soft skills. I'm also going to add on an extra module at the end of the webinar, which wasn't contained in the original one, as a result of some of the questions that were raised. It will provide a brief overview of the cognitive training program mentioned during the presentation. This is the model that predominates in our schools, in our training programs, in our culture, in our workplaces. We know we need to have hard skills and we need to have soft skills, and both are necessary for workplace and life success. We explicitly teach hard skills in school, in training programs, in the workplace, but we don't typically teach soft skills. For the most part, we just hope that our students and employees have them. Why is that? This simple distinction doesn't tell us much about why these skills seem different to us or why we struggle with how to instill soft skills in our students and our employees if they are lacking them. And that's what I hope to provide some insight into in this webinar. If you search online, you will find more lists of soft skills than you can shake a stick at. They range from a handful of skills to hundreds of skills. Some lists, like this one, are research-based and focus on what employers feel is most important. So that seems like a good place to start. As you can see, employers' priorities include skills like communication, flexibility, integrity. Which of these skills do you find to be the most important in your workplace? When I asked this question during the original webinar, the answers I received included critical thinking, active listening, flexibility, connecting the dots, thinking creatively, determination, and self-regulation. Now we're going to take a little deeper look into the nature of these skills. Lists of hard skills typically include things like typing or reading or accounting, and the hard skills that employers want from their employees, of course, vary depending on the nature of the job. So what I'd like to do is to take an example of a hard skill that most of us probably have, although we may not use it very often in our workplaces, and use that to dig a little deeper into how hard skills and soft skills differ. Riding a bike is a hard skill that most of us have, and I want to share a few minutes of this video with you. So the video goes on, and it's, of course, quite entertaining, but even just this excerpt makes a point. When we have learned a hard skill, like riding a bike, really well, it is automatic. We don't need to think about it consciously. In fact, we can't really think consciously about it. If we could, then Dustin would have been able to think his way around that one change the mechanics made with the bike. I hope this suggests something to you also about the challenges of retraining employees when the process of doing something they have at the automatic level changes. Processing then has to go from unconscious to conscious, and it will likely again take a lot of practice to get the new procedures efficient and accurate. Many people, when they watch that video, ask if this is an example of muscle memory. In fact, it is, but it's not really our muscles that remember, and this leads us to the need to consider and understand what learning is. So what is learning? As you think about how you would answer the question, some of the answers I typically get include things like learning is a change in behavior, development of a knowledge or skill previously unknown, taking in new information and being able to apply it, changing opinions and attitudes, understanding information. All of these definitions are relevant and reflect our common understanding. But now I want for us to consider what is going on in our brain, which is where learning happens. In fact, at its most basic, Learning is the act of making and strengthening connections among neurons in our brains. Learning takes place when neurons connect and communicate. Neurons are activated in networks that enable them to work together and to communicate with other networks. When we remember something, we don't go pull it out of a storage vault or some special repository in the brain. Remembering is really reconstructing or reactivating the networks of neurons that were activated previously. When we remember, we reactivate the networks of neurons that were involved in our earlier learning experiences. The neuroscientists help us remember this with a catchy phrase: neurons that fire together, wire together. So when a group of neurons fires together repeatedly, they are more likely to fire together when one or more of them is activated. Just as a reminder for those of us who maybe don't spend all of our days thinking about neurons, this is a diagram of 3 neurons. Each neuron has a nucleus represented by the black circle in the center and 1 axon. The axon is the part of the neuron that carries electrical and chemical messages from the neuron to other neurons, and it connects to what are called the dendrites of the other neurons. Those are the parts that receive the messages. Each neuron has approximately 6,000 dendrites, but just 1 axon. And the place where the axon and the dendrite meet is called a synapse. Communication among the neurons, that is, the neurons talking to each other through their synapses, is the basis of all human behavior. Here is a picture of real neurons, magnified many times, of course. The one on the left shows the neurons of a newborn, and the one on the right shows those of a 2-year-old. At birth, and really throughout our lives, the brain has approximately 80 billion neurons. At birth, it weighs about 1 pound, and when we're adults, it weighs about 3 pounds. In all that growth, what is happening doesn't mean that we're creating new neurons. In fact, we have basically the same number of neurons throughout our lives. But what it is happening is that incredible growth you see reflects the creation of trillions of connections among those 80 billion neurons. This creation of connections is what our brains do when we interact with our environment, that is, when we learn. Neurons form networks in different areas of our brain so that we can see, hear, talk, walk, ride a bike, type, change the oil in a car, communicate, learn new information, and be flexible. Now we're going to do a little experiment to underscore how neural networks work. So what I want you to do, got to go back to that one. What I want you to do is study the words on this list. I'm going to give you just a little bit of time here in order to study them and see if you can learn them. Okay, now write down all the words that you can remember. And again, I'll give you a few moments to write down the words that you can remember from that list. Okay, how many words did you remember? Most people can recall 6 or 7 words. That's my experience as I've done this experiment. If you got 9 or more out of the 15, you did really, really well. But that wasn't the only purpose of this exercise. Did you write down the word sleep? Usually about half of the people doing this experiment write down the word sleep or sleeping. But the word sleep was not on the list. In fact, now we'll go back to the original list so that you can check that. So there are a couple of important observations we can draw from this little experiment. First is that we organize information and activate our memories in networks of connection and meaning. So when we think of concepts closely related to another word, sleep in this example, the neurons that are involved with that word are activated. The second is that we can see that memory is actually a process of reconstruction, not just a videotape of exactly what we saw or experienced. Otherwise, we would never write down the word sleep. But in fact, many of us do. We may not remember everything, and our networks also can fill in missing information. So how do we go about wiring neural connections so that we learn something? And what does this mean for hard, soft skills? One of the neuroscience findings with the most importance for teaching and learning is the distinction between two types of long-term memory, declarative and procedural. Declarative memory is our general knowledge and our life experiences. We recall that consciously. And procedural memory is skills and habits that get practiced until they are automatic and non-conscious. We know all of this thanks to a man named Henry Malloy, who was known by thousands of psychology students before his death as HM. HM, or Henry, lost his memory on an operating table in a hospital in 1953. He was 27 years old. He had suffered from epileptic seizures for many, many years. His neurosurgeon believed that by removing a part of his brain, the seizures could be stopped. The part of the brain that neurosurgeon removed is called the hippocampus. Following the surgery, while the seizures disappeared, Henry was no longer able to form new memories. Up until then, it wasn't known that the hippocampus was essential for creating memories. After the surgery, Henry could not learn new words, songs, or faces. He forgot who he was talking to as soon as he turned away. He didn't know how old he was or if his parents were alive or dead, and he never again clearly remembered an event or who the current president of the United States was. In contrast, though, he did retain the ability to learn some new motor skills, such as becoming faster at drawing a path through a maze or using a walking frame when he sprained his ankle. This learning, of course, was at a non-conscious level. He had no conscious memory that he had ever seen or done the maze before, or that he had used a walking frame, but he did get better at doing it. So what does this mean for educators and trainers? Procedural memory, as we've said, deals with processes that has become practiced or repeated until they become automatic. When you do something over and over again, at some point your brain gets to the point where you no longer have to think about it. Skills that are stored in procedural memory include motor skills like walking, riding a bike, typing, changing the oil in a car. If you're thinking to yourself that these sound like hard skills, that's exactly the point. While there is likely some initial instruction involved, like where to place your hands on the keyboard or how to drain the oil out of a car, it is the repetitive practice of these skills that makes them automatic, and we get better through rote rehearsal. And then we don't need to pay conscious attention. Think of the times when you say you're on autopilot when you're driving, doing a much practiced task, or how you can get to your destination when you're driving a car without really remembering how you got there. The other type of memory, declarative memory, is called that because you can declare it. You can tell this information to somebody. It can also be further divided into semantic and episodic. Episodic memory is our memory of what happened to us yesterday and 20 years ago. Semantic memory includes words, the symbols we use to represent them, what words mean, rules of grammar, math facts, and similar information. So episodic memory is what you need to remember where you parked your car. Semantic memory is what you need to understand what the parking ticket under the windshield wiper means. And procedural memory is what enables you to drive home. These skills require conscious processing, at least the declarative memory skills, and therefore a different type of rehearsal. And in fact, when we're starting to talk about declarative memory, elaborative rehearsal rather than rote rehearsal is the most effective. And that requires conscious processing, as do our soft skills. So here we have some of the most important characteristics of effective elaborative rehearsal of information to get it stored in declarative memory. All of this, of course, involves conscious processing. First, we need to interact with the information to create a strong memory. There are, of course, many different ways we can do this, from mind maps to role-playing, mnemonics to journaling. Listening to a lecture is not the best way. Multiple modalities are also important. If information is only presented one way, for example, by telling students, then the only way they have to retrieve it is by accessing the auditory impression that they received. If, on the other hand, we arrange for students to experience something with multiple senses and in different ways, they will have many more ways to hook back into that information. Making sure that we provide real-world examples is also important. Relevance is a very strong motivator of attention, and irrelevance is a very strong motivator of lack of attention. If students don't see the point of something, they tune out. Real-life examples also make the information more vivid and therefore more memorable. And finally, linking new information to what students already know is essential to create meaning. Think of how different these strategies are from the rote rehearsal needed to encode procedural memory. But also think about the need to revisit and activate this information in a variety of ways over time to strengthen those neural networks, to activate and reactivate them. If this was a live workshop, and the title here says your turn to elaborate, this is a point where I would stop and give you an opportunity to process what you've been hearing. I might ask you to pretend that the person next to you had just come into the room and missed the first part of the presentation. You would explain to them what they missed. Teaching something to someone else is an excellent method of elaborative rehearsal. So if you're not in a position to do that right now, at least stand up and take a deep breath. That's also a brain-friendly practice. Now that we've drawn a more useful distinction than hard and soft skills, that is, between procedural and declarative memory, I want to take advantage of another area of research that can help us understand the learning process, and that is the whole field of cognitive skills and intelligence. Cognitive skills are the mental processes we use to get information into our brains, to make meaning of it, to store it and retrieve it, in fact, for everything we do. Cognitive skills are used in the creation of both procedural and declarative memory, and indeed for all learning. At the bottom of this chart are a group of cognitive skills that we call foundational. These are things like our attention skills, visual processing skills, auditory processing, our processing speed, sequential and simultaneous processing. These are the basic ways that we get information into our brains from the outside world. On top of that are a group of cognitive skills that are referred to as executive functions. This term is being used and emphasized increasingly in education, but it isn't being broadly used yet in workforce development, and it's time to change that. Recent research makes it clear that these skills are predictive of everything at the top of the chart. The ability to read and do math, academic performance, how much money we're going to make, what our long-term health outcomes are going to be, and whether or not we're going to end up in jail. Executive functions are highly correlated with all of those outcomes. The three core executive functions are working memory, which is our ability to hold information in our minds while we think about it. Inhibitory control, pretty much what it sounds like, our ability to stop ourselves from punching someone in the nose when we get mad at them. Also, to defer gratification over a longer period of time. And then cognitive flexibility, our ability to shift our mindset when the rules of the world around us change. On top of that are higher order executive functions: reasoning, problem solving, planning, critical thinking, collaboration, creativity, communication. And I suspect you're thinking to yourself that these sound a lot like soft skills, which of course they are. And of course then at the very top is where we want all of our students to get to. We want them to be good readers and good mathematicians, which is also important for them to be able to be successful in academics and in the workplace and in life in general. The point of this chart is that not only do different hard skills and soft skills need to be rehearsed in different ways, we also need to address the cognitive infrastructure, or these underlying skills that each individual brings to the learning process. It used to be believed that cognitive skills and intelligence were fixed. That is, whatever level of attention or processing speed or working memory or cognitive flexibility an individual brought to a learning situation or came into the world with was really all they were ever going to have. But today we know that these skills can be improved. In fact, many of our students come to our classrooms or workplaces without strong attention or cognitive flexibility or inhibitory control, and mostly we assume that we just have to deal with it or help them to find ways around those weaknesses. But in fact, there's an approach that is very effective. The exciting news is that with the right kind of training and practice, cognitive skills and executive functions can be developed to a greater degree and more quickly than you might have imagined. This is a research study with students with learning disabilities, and by definition, they have weaknesses in some important cognitive skills. They used a cognitive training program called BrainWare for 12 weeks, 3 to 5 times a week, for 30 to 60 minutes per session. If you're interested in learning a little about BrainWare, I will be doing that in a supplemental section of the webinar at the very end. In this research, students who were far below average in skills like working memory, attention, and executive functions were able to improve these critical skills to very close to, or sometimes even surpassing, the level that would be considered normally developing. I can also tell you that these improved cognitive skills in this study, and of course those improvements were far greater than the control group, which you're seeing both here. And those improvements in cognitive skills also drove dramatic improvement in academic performance. So these students improved 0.8 of a grade equivalent in reading and a full grade equivalent in math in just 12 weeks. And that did not happen for the control group. So this reinforces the concept that cognitive skills are the infrastructure, or maybe even the gateway, for learning. With stronger foundational cognitive skills, executive functions, higher order skills, or soft skills if you wish, also improve, and the ability to learn new skills of any kind is dramatically better. So now what I want to do is to connect the two areas we've explored so far in the context of soft skills. Clearly, we don't have time for a comprehensive examination of all the soft skills we mentioned at the beginning, so I've chosen 2 examples: flexibility and communication. Flexibility was one of those important cognitive skills identified in Roleplay's research in that slide at the beginning of the presentation. And this is one where we can see both the role of cognitive skills and the right kind of learning experience. Remember that cognitive flexibility was one of those core executive functions in our pyramid in that chart. So indeed, there are mechanisms in the brain that support our ability to change from one perspective to another. So first we want to make sure that those underlying cognitive infrastructure skills are in place. Then we can use what we've learned about improving declarative memory to integrate it into practice. This is an exercise I use with my MBA students in the strategic thinking course I teach. Changing the way we think involves first being aware of how we think, and then appreciating the fact that others may think differently, and that is not always an easy task, but here is what we do. Talk about mental models. Mental models are how we think about the world and what we take for granted. Sometimes they're very useful. For example, my mental model that the sun rises in the east every morning is useful. So is my mental model that I shouldn't trust someone I've just met with my credit card. But sometimes they're not as useful and can even be counterproductive. So first I ask students to think about their mental model of a homeless person. And then they watch this video, which I'm going to share with you now. typically happens at this point is that students start to observe how everybody's mental model, of course this differs from most people's mental models of a homeless person, and as students discuss it, they start to realize that each of them has a different model informed by their own experience. Not only do they have mental models of homelessness, but also of the communities around them, the way that this particular community chipped in to help Dawn. And then what we do is we start to explore mental models that we have of people and things in the workplace. In the context of school, we could do it about school or life or anything else. And they start to be aware of the need to explore the way that other people think or business problems from multiple perspectives, to change their minds as new information is uncovered, and to look for ways to integrate different points of view. Of course, one exercise isn't enough. Soft skills, like anything else, require practice, but here it's not rote rehearsal. It's helping them to elaborate it in a variety of contexts. I also typically have them do journaling on this particular topic, which they really express some very deep insights and some often some strong reactions to this experience. Now let's take on communication, or at least one aspect of communication. The importance of being specific in communicating with others and the potential utility of asking clarifying questions. First, let's consider what the role of underlying cognitive skills and executive functions would be. Communicating with another person requires us to be able to sustain our attention. If we go wandering off in our attention, then the other person assumes that we're not very interested. It also requires divided attention as we listen to, but also consider options to respond. It requires inhibitory control if the person says something that seems inaccurate or unfair or even offensive. Punching your boss when you get feedback is usually not very helpful. And it requires a substantial amount of working memory to hold the information you're receiving in your mind so that you can effectively address it. So our student who has had cognitive training is going to be far better equipped for the challenges of this or any communication task than one who hasn't. For this exercise, you would ask for 2 volunteers for a role play. One of them gets this set of instructions, and I do want to credit Skills to Pay the Bills for this example that I adapted this from. And there are lots of wonderful exercises like this one that you can find online from just a ton of different sources. Here, the internet is a great friend of yours. So what this situation does is posit that there is an employee, basically, who is a lawnmower and has been working at this for a few weeks, loves the job, thinks they're really getting into it. Last week, they weren't at the lawn of this particular individual that they're just about to start on the lawn. Somebody else had taken care of the lawn the previous week. The other role is played by the boss, the customer. And they just hired this company a few weeks ago, but last week when they got home after the lawn had been mowed, they weren't there when it was being mowed. It was just a mess. It looked terrible. So this boss, this customer, is very dissatisfied right now. He's a little unhappy. He might be a little agitated. And specifically, the grass that was left on the lawn, the edges that weren't straight were the problem. So right as you're thinking this, the person who's coming to mow your lawn, so this is top of mind, and you really want to let them know. So as you start this role play, students can, a number of different things can happen, of course, one of which is that they can fail to communicate almost at all and just sort of get mad at each other. Or they may, in fact, appreciate and get to the point of addressing the specific information about why the customer was unhappy with the previous week's lawn mowing, which is really important. So if that happens during the role play, then the other students who are watching can point to the questions or the comments on each side as good examples. If not, then of course you can discuss whether the customer or the lawnmower could have done better in expressing or delving in or finding out what the real problem is. Additional practice with other kinds of scenarios will likely be necessary, or even better, the opportunity to reflect on and analyze their real-life interactions. But I also want to point out the role of executive functions again. Working memory to be able to hold on to the complaints of the customer. Inhibitory control lets us regulate our emotions and not react in some inappropriate way when we feel attacked, like to say, well, that wasn't me, that was somebody else. And then cognitive flexibility to shift our mindset to asking relevant questions rather than defending. So we can go back now and check on these exercises to make sure that we're incorporating the key attributes of rehearsal for declarative memory. How good are these likely to be based on our criteria that we set up earlier? Well, our students were definitely interacting with the information in discussion and journaling and reflecting in the first case, and in the second, role-playing and then additional discussion. Multiple modalities were at play, as were real-world examples, and the exercises also required students to consider what they already knew about these subjects and connect it into that. So let's go back for a moment to the mental model we started with. We observed that hard skills often rely on procedural memory. They happen at a non-conscious level. We don't have to do a lot of conscious thinking when we perform them, unless we want to change them, and they will be hard to change. Soft skills rely on conscious processing. We have to plan, solve problems, hold information in our minds, see new patterns, and work with others. Both kinds of skills will be acquired more easily and efficiently with strong cognitive skills and executive functions, although we will approach the way that we help students build on that and gain these skills in different ways. Just to summarize what we have talked about in terms of developing soft skills. We talked about the potential for cognitive training to develop the cognitive infrastructure that's critical to develop these skills. We've identified, based on neuroscience research, the kind of learning that's required for soft skills to develop and operate, based on the distinction between procedural and declarative memory. We've also discussed examples of elaborative rehearsal and the importance of connecting to real life and using multiple modalities in the process of teaching and learning soft skills. So let's now check our understanding. If you took the survey that I provided, the link for it, just as the webinar was starting, you've already seen these statements. These come from Investopedia, but they're similar to many things I saw when I looked online to see how people were talking about hard and soft skills. So let's test these statements against what we've been discussing today, and I think that it will probably help to demonstrate why I believed a different model and a different narrative were essential. So here's how I react to these statements. Hard skills can be learned and perfected over time, but soft skills are more difficult to acquire and change. Well, hard skills can be learned and they can be improved over time, but so can soft skills, and they are not necessarily more difficult to change. And in fact, as we saw, once hard skills are deeply encoded and deeply embedded in non-conscious processing, they're going to be even harder to change in many ways than our soft skills. Companies that value learning as a soft skill recognize various learning styles and encourage workers to pursue the methods that work best for them. This is a common belief, and it tends to focus on providing a specific modality. So you'll hear people say, I'm an auditory learner, or she is a visual learner, and then try to gear all of instruction to that particular learning style. And as we saw before, that is not going to be the most effective. In fact, we have to appeal to multiple modalities and deliver information in lots of different ways. And that will provide better learning, deeper learning, more enduring learning for everyone, whatever type of learner they think they might be. Hard skills are specific teachable abilities that can be defined and measured, such as typing, writing, math, reading, and the ability to use software programs. I can't argue with that one. Those are what we believe. But it also a little bit implies that we can't teach soft skills, or that they're not specific, and that we couldn't define or measure them. And that may not be the case. I think there's a suggestion in what we've been talking about that, in fact, we can treat them a little differently than we've typically envisioned. And lastly, the term interpersonal skills is somewhat of a misnomer because it refers to character traits possessed by an individual rather than skills that can be taught in a classroom. Well, as we saw, interpersonal skills, one example of soft skills, is not a character trait. It isn't something that is just possessed or not possessed by an individual. These are skills that, with the right cognitive infrastructure and the right kind of training and the right kind of elaborative rehearsal to get things encoded in procedural memory, can actually be developed and taught in a classroom. So at this point in the webinar, of course, I stopped for questions. And that doesn't mean you can't ask questions, however, even if you're not participating in this live. I would encourage you to send me questions, give me a call if you would have any questions or would like to talk about any of this further. I would really welcome the opportunity to do that. Now, for those of you who would like a brief overview of BrainWare, the cognitive training program that we mentioned before, please stay tuned. Otherwise, thank you for listening, and we hope to see you at another webinar in the near future. So a little bit about BrainWare. BrainWare is a software program that develops 41 cognitive skills that are critical for learning. That pyramid of skills that you saw on that earlier chart that builds from attention through executive functions up through higher order cognitive processing. That's the sweet spot. That's where the program is targeted. It is quite comprehensive in terms of the scope and breadth of skills that are developed within the program. And it's also unique in that it develops them in a highly integrated way. So it's not like developing skills in isolation, but it's more like cross-training, where we make sure that these skills can work together and that they're well integrated. It comes from work that has been done in a clinical setting for many, many decades. So it takes the best practices of multiple disciplines like speech pathology and vision developmental expertise, psychology, neurology, occupational therapy, other kinds of therapy, learning specialists, and it combined techniques that they used in one-on-one therapy in a clinic into a set of exercises that was very effective. And what we did then is we married it with video game technology so that it can be developed and delivered in a much more cost-effective way to a much broader audience. The recommended usage for the program is 3 to 5 times a week, 30 to 45 minutes for about 12 weeks. And it can be used by anyone from age 6 to, I like to say, to 106, but really just about any age from 6 on up. I shared a tiny bit of research with you before. I just want to share a couple more briefly of the more than 30 studies that have been conducted with BrainWare, just to give you a sense of the kinds of impact that cognitive training has had for a couple of different populations. This was research with what I refer to as garden variety kids, just a range of kids in 1st through 7th grades, not chosen for any particular need, so it was quite a range of abilities. You can see the results of the pre-test and the post-test for the BrainWare group as well as for a control group. Again, the program was used, or the span between the pre-test and the post-test was about 12 weeks. The control group just went about their normal activities on a daily basis, and the BrainWare group also did BrainWare. So you can see that the cognitive improvement on the left-hand side was dramatically better for the BrainWare group. In fact, an improvement of 4 years and 3 months in just 12 weeks, compared to 4 months for the control group. And again, we see the transfer to academic performance, including almost 2 years of improvement on tests of math fluency, reading fluency, and passage comprehension, and those kinds of things. All of the information and detailed reports on these studies is available at our website, in the research area. One other population that I wanted to share a little bit with, because we think of brains as being particularly malleable when we're younger, and that is the case. However, it is also true that our brains are, as the neuroscientists refer to it, plastic throughout life. And this is a little bit from a study that was done with some college-age students. So what you're seeing here is for 3 students who participated in this small study, results from a test, a pre-test and post-test called the GAMMA, the General Ability Measure for Adults. And of course, since this was, well, I didn't say this, this is from a community college system in Indiana. These students, of course, were a range of ages and a range of abilities, a range of backgrounds. So for these 3, the change in IQ from pre to post-test ranged from 6 points to 21 points, moved dramatically, 2 of them particularly, into a different category within the IQ range, and gains in a variety of areas, things like pattern recognition and processing speed, sequential processing, analogies, so understanding their relationships. So we've also done work in workforce development and with students from poverty, students from English language learners, a whole variety of different populations. And the experience is always quite similar. In this particular one with the community college students, they were also asked to reflect on how any differences that they saw in their thinking processes as a result of their using BrainWare. And they commented on things that were directly related to the kinds of training that and skills, of course, that are developed in BrainWare, memory, focus, speed, and accuracy. But you'll also see here some of the kinds of things that start to really connect to soft skills, or the way that we think about soft skills: critical thinking, motivation and persistence, listening skills, dealing with frustration. So it reinforces that whole understanding that our underlying cognitive skills are directly connected to our executive functions and to those higher order skills or soft skills. What I want to do now is just do a very brief demonstration. And I'm going to show you 3 of the exercises. There are 20 exercises in BrainWare. I'm just going to show you 3 of them so that I can try and connect this for you to 3 of those key executive functions. Now, I do need to underscore that each of these exercises is not just about that one cognitive process. Each exercise develops multiple processes. Processes are developed in different ways in different exercises, so it's like cross-training. But I think that the ones that I'm going to show you now are going to be able to provide you with a little bit of a way to connect to how these skills are developed. So what I need to do now is to share my screen. And get rid of that and that. All right. So this is an exercise called Bear Shuffle within BrainWare Safari. And what I want to connect it to here for you is a skill called working memory. Remember that working memory is our ability to hold information in our mind while we manipulate it. Now, this is level 1, so it's going to be pretty easy. After I show you this one, then I'm going to go up to a more difficult level so that you get a sense for how the progression proceeds. So what happens is I'm going to click Start Challenge, and the computer is going to give us 3 cards and turn them over. And our job is to get them into numeric order from smallest to largest. These are all randomly delivered, so every once in a while, like now, they are in the right order. I'm just going to check my answer, and I got it right. Now, getting it right just once isn't enough. We need to do it 7 out of 10 times. So I'm going to try it again. And wouldn't you know it, twice in a row. Okay, so I'm going to do that. I've never had it happen 3 times. All right, so here we get cards that are not in numeric order. It's a 0, a 3, and the 7 at the beginning, so I'm going to pick up the 7 and move it to the end. And now I'm going to check my answer, and I got it right. So I'm not going to finish this level. I'm going to hop out of it. And I'm going to go into this exercise at a higher level. Now, normally players can't jump around like this. This just enables me to show you how much more challenging this exercise gets. So I've jumped up a few levels. So if this seems quite a bit harder, it's because it is. And here again, we want to think about how the information we have to hold in our working memory as we manipulate it. So this time we're going to get 4 cards instead of 3. 0, 2, 9, 3, and then the computer's moving these around. 0, 3, 9, 2, 0. You know what? I was talking and not listening very well. Not listening, not keeping the information in my mind. So I'm not sure what it, I think that was the 9 though. So let's see. Maybe I need to switch these. Okay. Nope, I got it wrong. Let's try it again. And this time I'm going to concentrate. Remember, there are 4 cards instead of 3. Cards are going to switch after they turn back over, and that's not me switching them, but we still have to get them into numeric order. So let's try again. 4, 1, 2, 9. Now the computer's doing that. All right, I think what I need to do is to just move that 3rd one up to the beginning. And let's see how I do this time. All right, I did it. Again, we would do that 7 out of 10 times. So if I go in and look at the skills that are being developed, you can see a number of attention skills, sequential processing, processing speed, short-term memory, working memory. And of course, working memory is how we hold that information in our mind while we think about it and figure out how to move the cards into the right order. But we're also developing, as you can see, a number of other skills. So the next exercise I want to do is web weaving. And I'm going to go to level 2 because this is where we really start to work on inhibitory control. Remember, inhibitory control meaning something we stop ourselves from doing while we think about it, that we might otherwise do. And of course, we're also going to have to hold some information in our minds here. So what happens here is that we get an image on the left, and then it disappears. If this were level 1, I would just go ahead and click on these buttons to draw the lines. Now, hopefully you can hear, although it seems a little faint right now, a clicking sound. So what I have to do now is I have to click to the beat 5 times before I draw that image. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I can go ahead and draw the image if I remember it. So that's an example of how, well, we want to just rush in and draw that image before we forget it. Sometimes we have to stop ourselves and we have to really think about it before we do it. Well, let's double check and make sure I'm right. All right. Now, finally, what I want to do is give you an idea of an exercise that is directly connected with cognitive flexibility. And for this, I'm going to use an exercise called Iguana Lookout. Now, remember, this is not just about cognitive flexibility. It also has to do with directionality and attention, some ocular motor skills, and that kind of thing. But it's pretty basic and pretty easy at this early level. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to click Start Challenge, and we're going to get a bunch of arrows. And you can see they point different directions, and you can also see that there are buttons at the bottom. The first arrow is pointing up, so all I need to do is click up, and then right. All I have to do is click on the directions the arrow are pointing. Now, this can be hard enough if we don't have good right and left sense, but nonetheless, we can do it. And if I make a mistake, I'm just going to get a brand new set of arrows, so I really have to get to know my directions pretty well. Now I want to show you where the cognitive flexibility comes in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump up to level 4. And remember, you can't do this. We have to pass the levels that lead up to it. And here, if we read the directions, what we'll find out is that we're going to click on the button that names the direction of the arrow. But this time, there are 2 arrows that we're going to do differently. If the arrow is pointing up, we click down. If the arrow is pointing down, we click up. But right and left are the normal directions. All right, let's see how we do. So down, oops, down. I can't click down. I have to click up and right, and then up instead of down, and then left and right are the same. The next one's pointing up, but I have to click down. So again, I'm not going to finish that. I just wanted to give you a sense for how challenging these exercises are, and just a little glimpse into how we develop them. In this case, cognitive flexibility, but also along with our attention skills, our visual discrimination, directionality, oculomotor skills, and visual motor integration, among others. Oh, so it timed out on me. But I was going to exit the exercise anyway. And what I'm going to do is bring back up the presentation. I'm going to hide. No, I didn't want to do that. Hang on a second. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to go back to our presentation. So that's it. That concludes both the webinar and our brief overview of BrainWare Safari. We certainly look forward to hearing from you and seeing you at another webinar sometime. If you have questions again or anything that we can help with, please don't hesitate to contact us. And I will look forward to seeing you at another webinar, hopefully very soon. Have a great day.